I had some credit cards. I was in college and thought it would be a good idea to max out my credit cards and start a business. It started to seem to me that there was a new way of building businesses in the 21st century economy, and that no one had really put their finger on it. These macroeconomic shifts, they manifest themselves over multiple decades of time, and we're still not done seeing the impact of platforms. I'd actually say we're still very early on in seeing the true impact of platforms into all the different parts of the economy. We've had a couple requests for people to say, hey, Alex, tell us more about yourself. Why do you have the show? And why are you interested in all this kind of stuff? So I don't like to talk too much about my background, but here it is. So I started Applico about 11 years ago, and I had some credit cards. I was in college and thought it would be a good idea to max out my credit cards and start a business. That business was in the app world, and this was 08, 09. The iPhone had just come out, the App Store had just come out, and I thought that apps would be a big thing. And started making apps for myself. Some of those apps became best-selling apps we actually started on the BlackBerry App Store. There was actually a decent amount of iPhone apps, believe it or not, maybe a year and a half into it. So I started on BlackBerry. Those apps became really good sellers and then moved into Android and iOS. Other people started saying, hey, could you help us make apps? And that's when I started to get into the app development business. And Applico grew to become the largest app developer in the country. We had over 70 people at the time in 3 different offices around the United States. And I was in my early 20s and living the dream. And we were working with a variety of clients. We were working with some big companies like Intel, HP, GM, what I would call traditional linear businesses. And then maybe a third of our clientele were companies like Google and a bunch of tech startups. And our product managers would come to me and they would say, hey, the way we're building apps and building technology for this smaller subset of the clientele is very different than the majority of the clientele, these traditional large enterprises. Why? Right? For Google and these kinds of companies, you're working on content platform businesses. For other tech startups, it was marketplaces for services or for products. And they're similar because they're all facilitating exchange, but they're different because one's a content platform and one's a product marketplace. And no one could make sense of any of this. And so this was probably about 7 or 8 years ago. This was kind of early 2010s. Uber had been around for maybe a couple of years at the time. And so it started to seem to me that there was a new way of building businesses in the 21st century economy, and that no one had really put their finger on it. And so I started to dig deeper into is there a new business model going on here? And Nick and I had gone to elementary school together, and I went to Nick and I said, hey, I think there's a new business model here. And Nick was working in an economic think tank for a handful of years after college. He was an English minor in college. I knew he liked to write and kind of was thinking about doing a book. And I said, hey, I think there's a new business model here. And if there is a new business model here, we should absolutely write a book about this. And so he started to read everything that there was about anything relating to two-sided marketplaces to answer the question of, is this a new business model? And why hadn't anyone captured this before? And so he came back after a few months and said, yeah, no one else has connected all these dots. There is some academic research about two-sided marketplaces from, a number of years ago, but it was very high level. If anyone has read an academic paper, no offense to the academics, but it's very high level. Let's put it at that. We wanted to really do and write a book that was very pragmatic for entrepreneurs, for the business professional, that goes deep into the details of the business model, how it works, why it works, and how you can take actionable feedback and frameworks and apply them to your own business. And so that was where there was some stuff talking about two-sided marketplaces, but then you have content platforms and you have investment platforms and you have social networks, right? And how do you pull that all together? And so that was then what we set out to do for about 3 years, where we were building frameworks and we were stress testing them with the platform companies that we were working with in Applico, some big, some startups. And so we were building these frameworks for our own use to help structure and say, well, is this a commoditized or an uncommoditized service marketplace? And all these types of, things that you read about in the book and structures that we put into the book, we actually were using in the market. And that's how we were able to harden them and really stress test them. And so we found Macmillan as the publisher, and the book came out in 2016. And, all along the while, I was trying to thinking about Applico and what's the future of Applico. And I knew that eventually app development would get commoditized. And it wasn't really that interesting to me to play in the commodity game, right? I didn't want to compete on price and do development offshore, and that really wasn't of interest to me. And I saw a much grander vision around this business model concept. At the time, I actually didn't even know to call it platform, to be honest. I just felt that if no one had captured the thinking around this new business model, these are once in a generation type of changes that come into fruition. These are macroeconomic shifts that don't happen over a few year period of time. Like say a new technology like mobile. We've now seen 10 years of mobile and everyone's kind of saying, what's the new thing, right? These macroeconomic shifts, they manifest themselves over multiple decades of time. And we're still not done seeing the impact of platforms. I'd actually say we're still very early on in seeing the true impact of platforms into all the different parts of the economy. And that's what we cover on this show. So I knew that if no one had put their finger on this and captured this, there was a lot of opportunity to own the thinking around it, really drive the thinking around it, and then figure out a way to create value around that. And that's pretty much all I had to basically go back to the company of 70 plus people and try to explain that the current definition of success was no longer the definition of success. And unfortunately, I could not detail what the new definition of success was. But I knew it had something to do with this new business model, which I still didn't know to call platform at the time. And I knew it was somewhere over in this direction over here, but I didn't know how long it would take for us to get there. I didn't know if we'd get a book deal at the time, but I knew we had to go full force in this direction. And oh boy, those 3 or 4 years of transition in Applico's evolution were easily the hardest thing I've ever had to do, ever in my entire life. It's very hard to see people go either voluntarily or involuntarily. The company had to go through a wholesale business model change. And then when the book came out, we figured out, we're going to call these things platforms. And the book got a lot of traction. What we started to do is say, okay, we're going to focus on filling this void between how do large traditional enterprises take advantage of platform business opportunities and help bring these two sides to these two worlds together. And that's what Applico has been doing. Last year, in May of 2019, 3 years from when the book came out, we launched the first ETF with Wisdom Tree's ETF called Platt. We helped them, we licensed them data to help them launch that ETF. And that has 70 plus public platform companies, all the public platform companies with over $2 billion market cap, and puts them into a basket of stocks that allows people to invest in platform businesses and take advantage of the financial opportunity that is coming true with platforms continuing to just control a greater and greater share of the economic value created in the 21st century economy. So really what we've been able to do with Applico and me personally is to say, how do we help people enable access to the modern economy and take advantage of these new business model opportunities, whether that's through the book and the education and the content that we create, whether that's through financial means, through the ETF, whether that's through the work that we do in Applico, which is helping these large enterprises take advantage of platform opportunities. And that's really how it's all come about. And I personally have worked really at all spectrum of platforms, from small startups to large platform monopolies to Fortune 10 multi-billion-dollar traditional businesses that are trying to figure out how to move into platform opportunities. And what really gets me excited is that there's still such a wide gap and such a myriad of opportunities for traditional enterprises to take advantage of platform opportunities, whether that's building things entirely from scratch, but also whether that's them saying, I need to build some stuff from scratch, but I could also go partner, invest, or buy other tech companies that are already platform businesses, or buy tech companies that I'm then going to turn into a platform business. And it's really untapped how these two different models are coming together. Platforms have a very difficult time achieving scale and solving that chicken and egg problem. Every startup, that's the biggest challenge. Many times, the technology is most often not the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is, how do you play the chicken and egg game? How do you solve for demand and supply and then do that over and over and over again? And the good thing about large traditional enterprises is they have scale and they have a balance sheet and they have a lot of other assets. They have a brand, value-added services, many things that we've covered on the show. And that's really what we're setting up Applico for, which is over the long term. If anyone has read Steve Schwartzman's book, What It Takes, it's a great book. The long-term vision for Applico is to take what we're doing, which is in a more transactional advisory nature. Maybe sometimes we get to have some equity or share an upside of these new businesses that we're creating, but not always. And the long-term vision is to launch Applico Capital, similar to Blackstone's trajectory, where you've now built out enough depth, enough expertise, putting traditional businesses and platforms together, but you don't own the ultimate outcome of this. And if we are as good as we say we are, and we believe we are, why wouldn't we want to put our own money behind that? We absolutely would. But I need to go raise a pretty big fund to pull that off, to buy outright either traditional businesses, probably not multi-billion-dollar businesses at first, but say mid-sized businesses that have very relevant, actionable platform opportunities. They could buy, invest, partner other tech startups in the space, put them together with the scale, the intrinsic assets of that traditional business. How do you put both of these worlds together and get a platform business at scale in 2 to 3 years' time? And that's the expertise and the skill set that we are building and deploying today in Applico. And just how we monetize that for our business model is that longer term trajectory to raise a fund and be an actual owner in these deals that we're putting together. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit more about the company, and where we see this platform future going, and how we are planning to help make our mark on all of that. Hi, this is Alex from Winner Take All. Thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the content. Feel free to leave a comment, ask us questions, and definitely make sure to join us on our next live stream.